What's up, Eric? How you doing?
What up, Pete? I am good, my friend. How are you?
Ex Excellent. Cold chilling. I'm bummed that we're not in the same office. We can be like back to back right now since we're both in San Francisco. Hey everyone, welcome to Power Hour. We're gonna let folks kind of trickle in here. We've got a delightful guest here. We also have Eric. Um, from the head of sales from Vanta. While we have folks trickling in here, Eric, you got any travel recently that you've done, or any kind of like cool stuff that you're looking forward to this weekend?
I don't know about this weekend, but our entire company is doing an
Mhm.
in-person offsite in Palm Springs in 2 weeks.
Oh, damn! We just had one in Tahoe. It was run by um,
Are we?
Hannah White, who
Oh,
set it up. Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. Yeah,
who's
it was
who's,
kind of
who's
kind of
Hannah?
like SKO.
Who's Hannah White?
Hannah, Hannah, who runs Power Hour.
I'm kidding.
I know, you goofball. So yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. It's the entire company. So like GTM and like engineering, product design, etc. Everything,
We're
everybody.
ready, baby. We got like I think there's probably like 108. Well, I don't know that everyone is going, but like everyone was invited. I think there were
Wow.
like 180 going.
Oh man,
Uh, I
that'll
was
be
I, I was I was just recently told that I am emceeing the event, so that should
that'll be perfect.
yeah.
It'll be absolutely amazing. Okay, cool. Well, we'll go ahead and get into this here. Thanks everybody for joining Power Hour. So just to get people familiar with Zoom here, the event does encourage audience participation. So please do use the chat panel at the bottom there. You can use the Q&A panel, et cetera, et cetera. Let us know where you're calling in from in the chat here. And but yes, for folks that aren't familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and related disciplines. And the purpose of the community is to create an environment for our 30,000 and growing members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about. Eric is an OG MSPer, been around long time. I think you like snuck in while you were still a seller at DataFox. You're
I
like,
can
come on,
I can confirm that is not true. You definitely rejected me at the door a few times, but that's all right.
that
Here we
is.
go.
Oh, that's what it was. It was because it was your sister.
Yeah,
Your sister got admitted before you did because she was the
yeah,
sales manager, and
yeah.
then she was like she was roasting you about it. Yeah, yeah. So MSP achieves its mission through live sessions, kind of like this, through our online forum, which is amazing for Q&A, and then and now in-person events, which is great. We actually just had a couple. We had bi-coastal happy hours last week as part of our summit, which is pretty awesome. Actually, in Hayes Valley, there, right at Anina, up the street from Vanta. We rented that out, and then we also did one in New York. So it's super awesome. We're gonna be doing more of those in the future. So just before we get started, a couple of reminders. Power Hour is a unique format. There's not really a specific piece of content that we're going through. It's more just like Q&A. We're picking the brain of our delightful revenue leader guest here, in this case, Eric. So the whole idea here is that you're here to learn. This is Q&A, whatever your questions are. People submitted questions ahead of time. You have Eric at your disposal. You have me at your disposal. Obviously, you'll get better answers out of Eric than you'll get out of me. But your questions are what we're here to answer. So use the chat tab, use the Q&A, etc. So with that, we can do some introductions here. I'll make mine super quick. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm the founder of MSP, but also the co-founder and go-to-market leader at Atrium. So Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers use metrics to improve rep performance. So all we do is think sales nerd all day long. But but that's me. Folks are familiar with me. Eric, I would love for you to maybe kind of give yourself a little introduction here, talk about what you spend your time on at Vanta and kind of your experience before that at DataFox, but also like maybe even before DataFox too, just so it's like folks kind of like know the whole backstory, right?
Oh
Kind of
my
like
God.
where you're coming from, right?
Cool. Yeah, happy to. Also, shout out to Atrium. We are big customers here at Vanta. It's been a game changer for me as well as the rest of the sales leadership team. But yeah, let's see. Okay, quick bio. Background is in engineering, two traditional engineering degrees, not to be confused with computer science or computer engineering. I think what
Technical stuff.
exactly. I think what Pete's getting at is that like undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, then moved to Saudi Arabia for 3 years. Has spent basically the last decade and change in the Bay, minus 2 years of bliss in Venice during COVID. But let's see, back in engineering, tried to start 2 companies of my own, learned a ton, neither of them worked out. That is ultimately how I found my way into sales. On the advice of any number of my kind of advisors who were like, hey, if you want to be a CEO again, every CEO has to be a good salesperson. You're such a people person. We think you'd be good at this. It's going to be humbling. And so you go from like startup CEO to like SDR. And humbling was an understatement, but like.
So good though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. And then maybe just kind of walk through like what DataFox is, DataFox did, who you guys were selling to, and then kind of do the same thing with Vanta, so people just kind of have familiarity with your familiarity with different sales motions.
Yep. So prior to joining Vanta, I was at DataFox. DataFox was an account enrichment tool. Think of it in the same vein as like a Dun & Bradstreet or ZoomInfo. We were selling primarily to sales ops leaders, which was where I kind of got my first kind of introduction to the world of sales ops. And
yep.
I don't know, just kind of all the nuances there. We were selling mostly SMB mid-market deals. We were selling, this is key to, I think, my success here at Vanta so far. We were selling very much a nice to have product. Whereas at Vanta, we automate security and compliance. You might have seen our billboards, compliance that doesn't suck too much.
So good. It's so good.
It's so funny because like, it's so funny because billboards are generally like hard to quantify, like whether or not they work, but I get 3 pings a week from people that end up signing up. Like, saw you
people
billboard.
Just like, do they just like take pictures? I think every time I drive down 101 and I see it, I like take a picture of it and like text everybody I know at Vanta. It's so good.
Yeah. But in any case, at Vanta, we, as I said, we automate things like SOC 2, GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, and PCI. And we predominantly sell it into the SMB. For us, that's defined as companies with fewer than 200 employees. The only common denominator being they're all cloud-based.
Yeah. Killer. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. So now we'll just kind of get into some of these questions again. Like, if you have questions, please do go ahead and share in the chat, in the Q&A. We have a bunch that were submitted ahead of time. And we'll kind of start out with those. But one thing that I would love to kind of get your perspective on, Eric, is like, what have you learned? So, because you guys primarily sell to startups. Right, like you were saying, SMB, like it's not like an SMB like plumber, right? Nothing wrong with that sales motion, but like that's not what you guys do. And I would love to understand kind of like some of the ins and outs and like what are the most impactful learnings you've had around selling to startups, right?
Yeah, totally. So one of the benefits is that like fewer moving pieces, fewer kind of people at the table, right? So out of the gates, like our sales cycle has been very fast, right? Back in kind of 2019, average sales cycle was literally like 4 days. And this is for like
everybody's gonna like jump through the screen and choke you. What?
Yeah, but like once again, back in the day, we didn't have any competition. We've created this category, and so sales cycle 4 days, ACV 15 grand. Win rates were north of like 80%. Now it's where the kind of ACVs are still in that kind of like 15 to 50 grand range, and the average sales length is around a month. But in selling to these startups, these founders, I mean, it's a joy. For us, we got in many ways just lucky, right? The alternative to using Vanta before we existed was going out and hiring a human auditor. And so, the benefit of selling to these founders is that they're all software forward, right? Like it's like, hey, do you want to spend 40 hours using software to get this done? You want to spend 200 hours with this human looking over your shoulder? It was kind of a no-brainer. Yeah. But I will say this, one of the downsides of selling to startups is that, like, when we look at kind of churn, a lot of it comes from early stage companies that
go
out of
away.
business. Yeah.
They go away.
So it's very real. Your old friend Caitlin Sullivan will attest to that.
God bless. Caitlin works in customer success over at Vanta. She was a CSM at my last software company, TalentBin, and she is absolutely delightful. Interesting. Yeah. So I think that there obviously there are some products that kind of like lend themselves to being sold to startups. Like there's a lot of upsides associated with this. Like we see this with Atrium quite a bit too, because I mean, Atrium works with like SMB and mid-market and also enterprise companies. At this point, we have all of them. But the cool thing with like early stage companies is like, you know, nobody's got time for anything, but they still have like the business pains. Like in the case with Atrium, it's kind of like, hey, did you want to spend like, weeks and weeks setting up a bunch of reports and what have you, let alone like actually paying attention to them and monitoring them? Or did you just want to like snap your fingers and like 90 seconds later, you're all dialed in there? And so I think that to the extent that people like, I think Paul Graham has done some kind of writing around this. And obviously like there's a number of companies that have done like say, hey, we're going to start with startups, but it's like the entry market. Like Stripe is probably the best example of this, right? Like it's one of those things where like that's not going to be your long-term market, but it's like a great like bootstrap mechanism. As you point out, like they have the problem, they're receptive to the to the value proposition of like automation and kind of being software forward, what have you. Oftentimes they have money because they've been financed by somebody. There's like less decision makers, et cetera. The ACVs will be a little bit smaller. And we see this with us too, like, we'll land in a startup at like, with a single seat for like 6K or like, 2 seats for like 12K or whatever. And then some of them like disappear and go out of existence. But then the other thing though, is that like the ones that don't, it becomes like this annuity and they just like grow and grow and grow and grow. And like pretty soon you're like an 80K recurring contract or whatever. The other thing that's kind of but I think what an important thing is that even for the ones that like do blink out of existence, a thing to be really kind of aware of is like following your champions to other places. And if you do deliver a phenomenal customer success experience and deliver on that promise, this is something that I've been like harping on with my team. It's like it's not about like lifetime value of the like account. It's like lifetime value of the contact object, if you will.
That's interesting. How do you follow those people though when they leave?
Well, I think first and foremost, we like there's just kind of like the organic version of it. It's like, hey, you're supposed to LinkedIn connect with everybody, et cetera, et cetera. Secondarily, like you just do a really good job of like delivering the hell out of your promise and making sure that people are like wildly successful. And then that way, like they find their way back to you. We also there's also some like pretty cool software that allows you to do this as well. So there's a company called User Gems. That's a they're a Craft portfolio company. So we're Craft is an investor in Atrium as well. There's a company called Sift Data, and so what you can do is like essentially monitor contact objects, and like they just have. I mean, it's like in the data realm, like DataFox and what have you. Like they just like scrape LinkedIn or whatever, and it's like, hey, I want User Gems to pay attention to these contact objects right here, and then ping me when their job change. Like when they change jobs or whatever, and like it'll like send an email, insert like a custom object, etc. So it's pretty fun.
We used to do, I remember back in the day, we would like create like LinkedIn Sales Navigator like lead lists of like the buyers, and then like be monitor when they leave. Now we use a tool called Polyatomic where we can pull kind of product data into Salesforce, and so like we can see whenever like someone goes from an admin to no longer being an admin, and or whenever someone leaves a company because they're like offboarded. And so then we use that as like a trigger to be like, yo, where'd they go? And it's funny you mention that because like we have now hit this inflection point where like we have just over 3,000 customers, and I've been calling this kind of like the year of the bear hug, because we have 3,000 customers and now like 19 kind of direct copycat competitors. And so it's like we need these folks to have, to your point, that experience such that like when they do leave to their next place, it's a no-brainer they go into the center for Vanta.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the ways that we kind of do that too, I love the bear hug analogy. I'm just going to go over to one of my reps' desk really quickly to be a pain in the ass here, and I'm going to steal these things. So what we like to do is like, get stuff on people's desks, right? Like these are these like laminates that we have on like sales metrics. Right. That's obviously very related to Atrium. We're like, making sure that we're giving them like sales scientist mugs and kind of stuff like that. just because like if you think about it, I mean, you guys have what did you say the ACV was?
For us, like it's called
15.
like let's call it 15 to 20K. Okay.
Yeah, that's always one of the things. It was like the lifetime value of the contact. So if you think about this, like if somebody's like a recurring $15,000 bill that shows up every year, like what's that worth to you?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is that worth? That's worth a lot. That's like worth a bunch of dinners and what have you, right?
Yeah.
Uh, um, but I think one of the interesting things about startups though is that like that can't be the only thing that you that's not necessarily like the long-term thing. That can be like a bootstrap mechanism, if you will. But eventually, like if you're going to be successful, you need to move up market in some sort of capacity, right? So you raise those ACVs, and also those are going to be the laggards as well. Have you guys been?
Oh, sorry, go.
I was gonna say, have you guys been doing that much, like moving up market? I'd love to hear kind of like how that's working or not working.
Yeah, so kudos to I honestly, big kudos to Christina and our product team for like the strategy they've taken. We like firmly believe there are more than 100,000 companies in this SMB segment who like could sign up for Vanta.
Yeah.
And we can talk more about kind of how we've done our best to like be the refrigerator magnet for all of those companies, where they are kind of internationally. But all that said, we've kept our core focus on this like SMB ICP while also paying attention to our kind of fast growing customers and like trying to have really tight feedback loops so that we understand kind of like when and where the product is breaking, so that we're not explicitly like one step in front of them. We're actually kind of like right where they are.
Right.
And
I think that's a very thoughtful like product management, because essentially like let me just make sure I'm going to restate that just to make sure that I'm following, where it's like a lot of organizations you'll say like especially if you have board members who don't necessarily maybe don't have a product management background or maybe don't have a go-to-market background. They're like, yeah, like you should start like busting your like just start running in the front of the castle and the enterprise. It's like, and then like so then you've got this situation where you're like grabbing that feedback, like we're like close loss, like close loss reason this, close loss reason this, et cetera, and then like how do you take that information and then like evolve the product in order to do that? Whereas I think what you're saying is a more organic way of doing this, where like some of these startups end up breaking out and then they start having emergent mid-market requirements emergent enterprise requirements. Essentially, like what they do is they kind of like drag you up there versus you trying to like bust into the enterprise or like the upper mid-market. Am I following?
Yeah, it's super fair, right? And for us, it's like one thing, everything in the world of security and compliance is nuanced, right? Like if you want to sound smart in this world, if someone asks you a question, you say it depends, because it's like everyone thinks their baby's cute, and like everyone's baby is kind of cute in that like as companies grow and they kind of adopt and kind of have their own compliance kind of programs and kind of personnel in place, like this is where once again kind of kudos to our product team on kind of like having these tight feedback loops from the CSMs. And for those listening, like one of the exercises that we did that was really helpful for getting feedback from the sales reps was we partnered with our product team and our ops team to create what we call a close wizard, which was to say that like,
love it.
So when our reps close one or close loss and up, they have to go through this pretty rigorous like information gathering flow.
It's like a flow. It's like a Salesforce flow.
Yeah. Which then we like beautifully have translated into this like very actionable Salesforce dashboard that now our product team is like, dope. We don't have to just rely on like AE's open text. When someone closes an op, we have like 2 buckets and sub buckets. And then,
I love it.
Yeah.
That's such a good idea. Now I totally want to do that because like, I mean, we have a very, unsurprisingly, we have a pretty rigorous close one, close loss process. There are like, some of the data is like atomized into pick lists and what have you, but it's more just like very rigorous like templating of like close loss notes and close one notes and whatever. And our A's do a really good job of it because we broadcast it around, right? It gets emailed out to the whole company, gets sent via Slack. So there's like eyeballs on it. So ain't nobody like shirking because they know that like they'll get blown up. But I really like the idea of just kind of like atomizing it more. And then of course, like, using a flow for entering that as opposed to like, here's the like 4 fields or whatever with validation rules, like just make it easy, just make it flow through there. I love that.
And then kudos to our product team. They give the various like department heads the opportunity like once every 6 weeks to come to them with their like Christmas wish list of like, here are the top 10 things I want from Santa Claus this year. And then they like, we can have a conversation about those specifics in addition to the data that they're seeing. So
I love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so on the moving up market thing, like I think there's a really kind of great gem there, which is essentially like getting dragged up market and getting dragged up market by this, by the SMB startups that have kind of like moved up there. One thing that I think is really interesting is, DataFox was a like we sales operations is usually present in our deals as well. Like Atrium is ultimately for managers and for leaders, for like non-technical, non-analytical folks to be able to use metrics in a way that like for people who don't have an engineering background or like don't have an econ background or or finance background or whatever, which is like most of us, right? But that said, like there's a human in the organization who oftentimes has a little bit of that bent in the large organizations that do have sales operations, especially when you get much further up market, there's sales operations teams. But so like that's a little bit of a technical sale, but it's like a quasi-technical sale, right?
the DataFox one,
Yeah,
or
well, like
selling to ops, selling to
yeah,
ops.
like us and like DataFox, like in our case, like sales ops is like not the buyer per se, but like they're in the conversation,
Yeah.
right? Because like they're an internal vendor that oftentimes will like try to solve this problem,
Yeah.
and the managers will still be grumpy about the fact that they don't have like what they need and they can't use what's been provided. You guys currently have like a big hits technical sale, right? Like it's a lot different than like you can train people on on Salesforce architecture or like Marketo or whatever. And like we do the same thing with our reps, like, oh, okay, like field mappings and what have you. Vanta, like there's a lot of nuts and bolts going on in compliance. So like what has been so different about that? Like what sucked? How have you surmounted that, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we hire reps, we kind of think about it in the context of like knowledge and skills, right? And
Yep.
so we like have these pretty tight interview loops such that like we feel confident about like the skills of the reps that we bring in. We
Sure.
still pair them up with like personal sales coaches to work with on a weekly basis. These are people like outside of Vanta that spend an hour a week kind of reviewing gong calls, doing skills development.
How
But
do you
then
do that? That's cool. I've thought about that notion because like managers, it's so funny because like yeah, gong and chorus, like the whole narrative is like, oh, managers will like be listening to calls, and it's like the dirty secret is like, no,
yeah.
right? Like ain't nobody got time for that. You have other people doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so effectively
Is it a vendor?
pretty early on in our like recruiting, we realized that like thanks to the like fast-paced nature of this and the fact that we're selling the SMB, it was really hard for us to attract and hire kind of like, true tenured reps with like, 6 to 10 years of experience. So we were
You want to grow your own.
Yes, we were attracting these like I describe our reps as kind of like Steph Curry after their second season. They're not like MVP yet, but they
Yeah.
have like major upside. And so it was like cool. Given that, I was like, what can we do to accelerate their growth? And so I reached out first to like half a dozen friends that were kind of enterprise reps at places like Figma, AWS, Salesforce. I think Marissa's on this call. I just saw a little shout out there.
Marissa, we love
And
Figma.
these were like mid-market and enterprise sellers who were not in management roles, but kind of had aspirations of or were curious about that. And so I pitched it as a pay it forward thing. It's like, hey, you want to like pay it forward to a younger rep? I'll give you like $100 an hour. Like,
yeah, but also and also like, hey, do you want to test out your management chops so you can like put a little line item like I was a Vanta sales coach or whatever. That's why I should get promoted.
Yeah. And now it's great because what ends up happening is like we have an internal full-time sales coach, and like she now kind of manages our coaching program. And what we do is like we treat them like advisors. So like once a quarter we have
that's insane leverage too
with our sales coaches plus our sales leaders, just to be like, all right, what are you hearing? What are we doing? And like, I don't know, it's hard. Someone asked me earlier today, like,
that's such a good idea.
Like, quantify it. I can't quantify, but like our average rep quota attainment is like north of 120%. So like it's kind of working, I think.
Yeah, totally. But that's like such a good idea because yeah, such systems thinking. Shocking, Eric. Shocking.
Yeah.
That is so good. Yeah, because essentially like rather than like throwing up your hand and be like, oh, I don't have time to listen to these calls. I'm gonna listen to calls at like 3x speed. It's like, no, man, like let's get some leverage in here. And man, that's such a good idea. Okay, so like so that's like, but that's skills. What about like knowledge?
Yeah, the knowledge piece is tough, man. I was really proud of getting out in front of making an enablement hire pretty early, but like I think in hindsight, that entire team, and they've done a tremendous job. They get more kudos than anyone in our whole company. But I think they are, the first to be like, hey, we could use more muscle here. And so on the knowledge piece, what we've done is yeah, kudos to Megan Hunting and Morgan for kind of leading the charge there for the first couple of years. But we built a really rigorous kind of onboarding and enablement program that is involved kind of live coaching, work ramp guides, and then also kind of like pre-recorded kind of like learnings. And so when I went about this, once again, maybe like you're gonna like systems guy, like I was like, cool, like what are these LMSs out there? I had some friends at WorkRamp. We got WorkRamp. I was like, hey, I want us to use this in such a way that like our kind of sales motion, our market, everything is changing really fast. I want us to build this in such a way that like we have 100 floppy disks, and when it's something
like updatable,
changes, we can pull it out, update it, put it back in. And that's like kudos to the team. That's what they've done today. Is it perfect? No, but like our reps ramping kind of at the speed that we need them to. Yes. But it's not easy, right? Like we're lucky we have a team of kind of in-house CPAs, ISO certifiers, security experts who are extremely generous. And
they like, you have the subject matter expertise in house. So like pulling it at very minimum, put like the brains are there to have it pulled out of to then be put into slides and videos and the LMS and what have you.
And like, does Atrium, do you guys use sales engineers in your sales motion?
No, we don't. And that's why like this is a big thing for us, because our sellers have to go toe to toe. Like our sellers are primarily, we have like a two-legged sale, right? Like we're talking to sales managers, we're talking to SDR managers, and also sales leaders as well. And so, it's not like super, super hard to get our reps to the point where like they're, skillful or like knowledgeable enough about like data-driven sales management, like, goal setting and tracking and like metrics and like, opportunity conversion and like, rep diagnosis and so on and so forth. Getting our reps to that level, it's like not nothing, but like, that's kind of like the primary thing. And then what ends up happening is like, then they kind of accrete more and more kind of like CRM architectural or like interface knowledge, because like the problem with that is like it's very whack-a-mole. Like these questions will come up like in random and like randomly, and so like I get to be the essentially solutions consultant there as the as the reps get more and more expert, but it's more kind of like the primary getting them up to speed on the like kind of the primary use cases for the primary user is something that like we very much focus on in onboarding. And so actually one of the things that I did recently, because like I mean we're probably like 2 years behind you guys in terms of like maturity. So like first the recommendations I would do around like onboarding of like a technical or even like a like a knowledge, like where you have like big knowledge requirements, is you can actually end up like do the trainings initially. Like you'll have someone who's like the founder or the sales leader or whatever, like do some trainings live initially. If you record those, like in our case, I just like invite chorus to like all my calls, like even internal calls. And so you just end up with these recordings on like talking about personas or talking about whatever, right? So the first thing is to kind of do that and make sure that those are being recorded, such that then you don't have to do like it reduces the synchronous time requirements later. And then the second thing, and this is one of our board members, is a gentleman named Mike Marg, who's at Craft Ventures. He used to be a sales leader at Clearbit, and then before that at Slack, and then before that at Dropbox. He has this really great blog post on essentially like a self-driving onboarding, and like thinking about how to make your onboarding to as large an extent as possible. Like just a rep can go down it, and even like they can maybe start it ahead of time, right? That was something that I did kind of 2 classes ago. Like I moved everything into Asana, and then like there's hyperlinks off to those recordings and documents. So we don't have like a big kid LMS yet. That'll probably be something that we do. Learning management system, that'll probably be something that we do next. But the good news is like we already have the content like at least recorded in some sort of capacity. So that's been like really helpful for us.
Where is it? Just like in a Google folder, or?
We have like essentially it's just like it's a bajillion different like Google Docs. It used to be in like a Google Sheet, where then like there was essentially just like it was a curriculum with like a bunch of line items, and then people would like link out to it. And then I moved that to Asana, a templated Asana checklist, and then like the curriculums were like linked off to that. And then eventually, but like right now the content for it is like kind of rough around the edges. It's MVP, it's startup-y, it's grimy. But it kind of like gets the job done. And I think the next iteration of that is to like go and put that into an LMS and then use that as a forcing function to like spiff it up, shine it up, et cetera, et cetera. How do you but what about like real-time help for the rest? Because like we're talking about like, upskilling them from a knowledge standpoint, like on onboarding. What about like they're in a deal or like they're even on a call and like they're like, oh God, this person said this thing that I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, that's why I was asking about sales engineering, because like for us, we have like two types of sales engineers. We have technical ones and non-technical ones. So like we refer to the kind of in-house security and compliance experts, these like domain experts, as like unofficially called sales engineers.
Sure.
I might actually be the only one that calls them that, but that's kind of how I think about them. And then we actually have two kind of technical sales engineers who have been tremendously impactful as we kind of have started to test giving folks trials as part of our go-to-market. And we like, how do we activate these folks? Oh, also like in many, many instances, a prospect wants to talk to one of our customer success managers before they sign up, just because everyone out there who we're competing with right now is like claiming to have white glove support. And so once again, folks are just insisting on the conversation. So what we've done to like streamline that is we have like, we call it like partnership sales. We have CSM request. We have, and then like our sales engineers are just kind of like in our kind of private sales group, but we have these like kind of requests where like within these channels, people can fill out like one of those kind of like Slack kind of actionable things where it's like, here's the context. This is the company. Here's the use case. Looking to talk to a CSM, boom. And then like all the CSM see it. And the first one that replies is like, I'll do it. They get to go. And I think we actually,
it's like a request. It's essentially a form, but it's being executed in Slack.
Yeah, and I think we spiff the CSMs on that if they like raise their hand and help us out, and then they end up closing. Yeah, but that's what we've done to date, and it's been really, really helpful. What we do
is that like fairly async, or are you able to get like live transfers? Because this is the thing that always like drives me. I mean, I would like. I think that's a fascinating thing because like the traditional, oh, I'm gonna bring the SE in and we're gonna have a meeting 2 weeks later and But like in a situation like you guys, like you want to be able to do it like runtime in some sort of capacity. Are you able to do that, or is it just like, hey, let's schedule a meeting tomorrow, like 2 days away?
We could, like folks could and probably do Slack, different like friends that they have on these other teams. But
hey,
like,
can you jump on a call?
Yeah, I'm honestly, yeah.
Great.
But I think that's the extent of that right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you had solved that problem, I'd be like, damn.
Well, but one of the things I'll mention though, once again, just in the spirit of like tracking things, is that like, what's part of the close wizard? It's like, did you tap on the shoulder of anyone from like these kind of like other teams? And so we can see like win rates when we bring them in versus when we don't, versus like what we're selling versus who's competing against us. And so it's kind of gnarly, but we capture and kind of present the data in a way that we can actually make sense of it. So
yeah, I think the first thing, yeah, exactly. I think you're making me think about this, like if I wanted to do my own close one wizard, would you call it close wizard? Close one wizard? Yeah. Close wizard. Probably the first thing I would do is like characterize the specific use cases, because like we actually do that in so it's like win rate by use case, loss rate by use case. You could also then end up splitting that by rep. Yeah. Be like, hey, this rep is like not good at this use case right here, or like, and then like let's upskill them, right? That is super fascinating.
We've done that, by the way. We've like created reports where we can see like individual reps win rates against certain competitors over certain time periods.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And then well, I mean, but the whole point though is like, and this is what like, obviously this is like Atrium's gospel around like data-driven sales management. Is like, cool, you see that and you don't just do to be like neener, or like, oh, I'm gonna pip you or whatever. It's like, no, you fix them, right? Like you fix it. That's the whole point, is like you use data to like, oh, there's a problem right there. Let's go ahead and intervene and resolve it. And then let's go back to the data and see, oh, did it remediate? Oh, wonderful. Yay. Everyone's better now.
I mean, once again, like this is just truthful. I'm not like plugging Atrium here, but like this is where like in Atrium, one of the kind of key reports that we pay attention to is the conversion rate from like stage to stage and from kind of stage to close one. And by stage, I mean stage and the opportunity. And so like looking at things like individual win rates for certain competitors, as well as kind of like how they're doing kind of from a conversion standpoint versus their other reps, like it's been like given managers the opportunity to go in and like kind of like focus on very specific things, like whether it's qual, whether it's negotiation, whether it's literally just closing the deal.
Yeah, I know. It is super fascinating to kind of see where the like hitch in the swing is for each rep, because like every rep will have like a different hitch in their swing,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And like it's crazy to start, especially like when you start like in you guys' case, because it's such a velocity sale, there's like so many at bats that are happening, like your sample size is amazing. And then also you have a bunch of reps, which kind of helps with that as well. It is just like super fascinating because like you can go and you can look at the and actually I think I talked about this in my data driven coaching masterclass that I did. Like you can literally see like, cool, this person's got a problem. Like you know, if your win rate from proposal is like off by 30% compared to like a sample size of like 10 other reps, like that's relevant, right? And like that's something that you should get after. Well, so changing gears a little bit here, I think the funny thing was when you joined Vanta, you were a seller at DataFox, right? I think you've been acquired by Oracle, what
yeah,
have you.
yeah.
And then so you went from being a seller to being a sales manager. So like, and then now you're a second level manager. Um, I would love for you to share kind of like the biggest challenges that you kind of surmounted in like, I mean, we can skip the like when you were an IC, like selling Vanta, like doing pioneer sales or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
I think that's cool, but like, I think the probably the more interesting thing to the MSP audience is like, go like, all right, I'm a first time manager, because like this is the case, especially in startups. Is like most managers are kind of like they were an AE
Yeah,
a year ago or 2 years ago or 4 years ago or what have you, and then there's another set of folks who are like about to be promoted to second level leadership, or maybe they move to second level. I
Mhm.
would love for you to kind of like talk about those two transitions and kind of like what the biggest challenges were.
Yeah, certainly. One of our kind of sales team values here is constant learning. Borrowed that from
Mm,
DataFox. And so for me, the progression was, I guess when I joined Vanta, like
mm,
the onset, it was like I was very forward with my communication with Christina. I'm like, hey, look, I'd like to like kind of come in, kind of build a playbook, build and lead the team for as long as it makes sense for the business.
mm,
And so it was one of those things where, um, yeah, I mean, it took us all of like a few weeks. It took me all of a few weeks to realize that like, okay, like
mm,
we're on to something here. Like
mm,
we need more bodies, just to help kind of like field the inbound interest that we're getting. And so it went from kind of IC to kind of player coach. I was player coach for a while, where we had like up
mm,
until we had probably like 5 or 6 reps. And in terms of like, how to like switch gears, to your point about like you kind of like initially kind of like leading a lot of the training and the onboarding,
mm,
honestly, like that's a lot of what we were doing. A lot of the forecasting that we were doing was like very rudimentary. Like we didn't explicitly have a finance team for the first year and a
yeah.
half. A lot of the like kind of like, I'm gonna call it guesswork, that I was doing in terms of like predicting kind of what we were gonna bring in,
Mm,
um, was based on kind of the data that was available to us. It's like pre-Atrium days. And
yeah.
so a lot of the kind of truly a lot of like the managerial learnings came on the job. I feel very like fortunate. I have a couple of like really good mentors. One of those being Ed Kalman, former CRO from Seismic, who
Mm,
I was able to lean into really hard to like get kind of
mm,
advice and inputs along the way. I strongly recommend that folks here reach out and find a mentor or two if they don't have one.
for sure.
Um, and yeah, I mean, look, there were like any number of kind of like learnings that there were any number of kind of managerial things that I was able to pick up through kind of conversations and or observation. And there were any number of like, there have been a million and one kind of like learnings that I've kind of made mistakes in the spirit of learning along the
Take
way.
take taking the
Yeah.
lumps. Yeah.
But like,
Unfortunately, like
yeah, sorry.
those are the like, unfortunately, like those are the ones that are like, those lessons are almost like the better ones, because
Yeah.
like there's just like burned in there.
I mean, that was kind of that like 2.5 years in, that was kind of what prompted the conversation with Christina, like, hey, like, I don't know if this company can afford to like have someone continuing to lead who's like learning on the job, which kind of like then like kickstarted us bringing on a CRO, which shout out to our new CRO, Stevie Case, who just joined us a couple weeks ago.
Oh, nice.
Um, but in any case, yeah, so a lot of learnings were kind of just like on the job, and just like the kind of like additional responsibilities were out of necessity. We were just growing so quickly
Yeah.
that like I needed to assume kind of these more elevated positions as we went.
Yeah. I think one of the big things that that I see with, because like we obviously work with a lot of managers, right? Like like our primary, users are SDR managers, sales managers, managers of customer success, and then like second level leadership for that. And so I think the biggest transitions is like the thing that made you a successful IC is not going to be the thing that's going to make you a successful manager. And we see this a lot with like the AE managers that we work with. Is like, deals. I want to be in the deals versus like, no, you can't be in the deals. You have to have leverage, right? Like you've got 6 reports, 8 reports, 10 reports, right? Like, so you get like, you're not going to be able to keep all their pipelines in your brain, right? You used to be able to keep all your pipeline in your brain. You're not going to be able to keep all their pipelines in your brain. So now you got it. Like you have to use data to manage them. You need to use systems to manage them. You need like, and it's not just like systems like, metrics or whatever, but also like one-on-ones. You need to have good structured one-on-ones, and they got to be recurring, and they got to have, they have to have agendas, and you got to have documents where you're writing things down. And so I think that like just admitting to yourself that like the thing that got you there is not going to get you to the next step is really, really, really important. So it's kind of like being willing to admit you have a problem is the first thing. And then, because then now you're open to things like having structured mentorship or whatever. Like use me as an example. Like I wrote a book on sales for startups. I have what I call a PLG sales coach right now who was a sales leader at Datadog and a sales leader at Drift. And it's fantastic because like Atrium has this emerging like easy, and our sales motion is kind of like sales assisted right now. So it's like very Datadog-y in that regard. Like it's not like pure self-serve, but instead like, our reps will set up an account with somebody and like, run a week or two kind of like pilot process or what have you. But like we're moving more in the PLG direction. And that's been like really powerful, right? Like, pay them like many hundreds of dollars an hour, but it's like, it's so useful. Also just being like very forward about reading as much as possible. Like this is actually, we use this kind of to our advantage. Like we give away so many sales management books. It's hilarious.
I feel like I get invited to receive one from you once every other week.
It's those are customer love programs. It's quarterly. Okay. It's quarterly, but we do it from a lead gen standpoint too. Like I have them like sitting here on my desk. Like, we have leading sales development here. We've got a bunch of other ones as well. But I think the reason why those lead gen programs work so well is because people they like want to do professional development stuff like that, but then they don't necessarily like take the, because like think about the search costs, like, oh, which book should I read, and so on and so forth. So that's been very powerful, I think, as well. And then also just like being open with your peers. Like I think this is why like MSP exists, and I'm really excited about us getting back into kind of like in-person salons, because people are a little bit like more loath to like ask a dumb question on a forum per se. But if they're like sitting around a table with like 6 other people that are kind of their peers, and like everyone's had a beer or two, that's like that's when people like really start complaining and like really start learning there. What about going to the second level management? Like because like that's a more rarefied transition. What were the kind of the biggest learnings when you went from like first level to second level?
Yeah, it's funny as we're talking about this, I just think about like I'm reflecting back on how did we do it as well as I think we did relatively. It's like I look at it and it's kind of in a funny way of like I just bought a lot of different types of insurance. It was like sales coaches. We set up an AE buddy program. We way over index on interview loops, right? So there's like Christine and I used to spend probably 10 hours talking to like other experts and people in other domains, like to understand, all right, what are we looking for? What's good, what's bad? How do we run these things? And like, so we have these really, frankly, like solid kind of interview loops that have allowed us to like hire the right people. And I speak to that because, we, any number of our first kind of like managers were just like really reps. People. We've actually like since promoted 2 of them to directors. And so once again, right, like, did I explicitly know what I was doing? Had I been a kind of director before? No. Did I have like good counsel? Yeah. But did I also like kind of buy what I thought and think were the right types of insurance to make sure that like all engines or all systems were still go? Yeah.
I think that's like an extraordinary insight there, because it's like being self-skeptical, right? And if you are self-skeptical, and it's easier to be self-skeptical when like you're coming from a place where like I actually don't know this, then the smart action to take would be like, I'm not just going to wear a belt, I'm going to wear a belt and suspenders and duct tape and this, right? And then what you do is like, it's like manufacturing your own luck, because like when one of those things messes up, the other thing caught it,
Yeah.
right? And so I think what you're saying, like what I'm taking away there is like, there's not really like a silver bullet per se, but instead it's like having lots and lots and lots of like backup systems,
Basically,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a really thoughtful thing to do there. What about so now that you're in the business of like second level management, what are the biggest things that you've done around like enabling your managers? Because like I think every time somebody goes from the prior thing to the next thing, essentially they have to like reorient their brain
Mhm.
into like, again, the thing of like, what got you here wasn't going to get you here, what got you here isn't going to get you here. And so like when you go to a second level manager, now your job is like not actually managing reps, and in fact if you're jumping down and like managing reps, like like that's
Yeah.
low leverage. How do you enable your managers
Yeah, it's
other
a good
than like
question.
hiring really great people, which is
Yeah, it's a
kind
good
of the
question. So
train of thought?
actually, like before we brought in Stevie, I was actually third level. And
Oh
so
god.
what I had done was I had promoted one of my managers to director. And shout out to Sean Crimmins. He's tremendous. And like he stepped up in a huge way, right? Because I was effectively overseeing the not just the AE org, but also the BD org, right? So you're looking
Yep.
at like 30 plus people here and 20 people here.
Yep.
And so all the more important to like, once again, just having good frameworks for like recognizing when people are kind of like just well suited for the job. And in this case, once again, let's call it like a good hire. Like Sean stepped into that role. He's done a tremendous job so far.
Yep.
And so it kind of gave me the air cover to
Mhm.
then kind of be able to be a little more strategic or thoughtful with my time and actually go like kind of just see the things that kind of like were kind of becoming out of alignment and going in and like doing what I'd love to do most, which is fixing or building things.
Problem solve. Yeah, I think that the thing there that when you jump up to second level management, what ends up happening is you have to then start thinking about like processization,
Yeah.
systemization. Like, this is how we do pipeline reviews.
Yeah.
It's documented right here, right? And then make sure that like I'm dealing with this right now, where we have enough AEs. We used to do I'm a big fan of like communal pipe reviews
Mhm.
that are distinct from like like deal strategy sessions, but we just have too many reps to like do everybody's pipeline together, so we've split it apart. So one of our team lead is running it, another one of our senior reps is running another one. And of course, then what we had to do is like, oh, okay, well, we have like two two parallel versions of this going on. We need to align this, right? And so that like it's like your job becomes, I think it becomes systematization via like documentation, and then also like tooling provision slash like I call it devolution, right? And so like this is the interesting thing with Atrium when we're selling to organizations, like the sales managers get it very quickly because they're like, oh
Mhm.
man, like yeah, like, oh, I came from this other organization and we had like, walls and walls of Tableau that were like inscrutable. And like, this is just like right here. But then when we talk to like second level leaders, often what like, they're oftentimes personally selfish about like understanding like the forecast or something, like,
Mhm.
which of course they should be, right? But then the thing is like they should be thinking about being a servant to their managers. Like, what do those managers need? And I think that's like, so in our case, we're like, yeah, your managers need to be able to manage with metrics and data. This is going to enable them to do so. And then there's, of course, like that's just like one slice of what a manager needs to spend their time doing. What are the other things you need to do? Because like you need to devolve that to the manager and enable them to do that. Like, I'll give you an example. We actually we exploit this a little bit, where so one of the things that we've observed, because we have like 300 customers now, and the consistency of like managerial enablement
Mhm.
in our customer base is like uneven. Like some companies like hit the cover off the ball and like we love them and they're delightful, and that those people like are off to the races, because like not only are they able to use Atrium to like understand what's going on, but then they can like manage from it. Whereas you have other organizations where like you can provide them insights about their reps or whatever, but like if the person doesn't know how to have like a direct conversation with their rep, like now you're kind of gated. So we have Richard Harris. So like Richard Harris is like amazing, like, you know, sales trainer, sales management trainer. We just have him do like day-long workshops once a month for like all of our customers, right? And like that's, yeah, and it's essentially just like a manager boot camp, like how to be a great salesman. Like it's like shorter than like Matt Cameron's like sassy sales management. It's just like a day, right? And we just do this for our customers. And I think that that's like a good example of like one of the things that people ought to be thinking about is like, hey, I've got like 2 managers or I got 4 managers or whatever. How can I enable them either via tooling or via, you know, via training or what have you?
Yeah, I love that. We tried to like come up with like a tailored managerial kind of monthly training with Winning by Design.
Yeah,
very experimental. Great team over there. Didn't explicitly like pan out for us, at least kind of like our first stab at it. But and like right now, our directors are kind of close to rolling out like a kind of a managerial development framework where, you know, we're now in a position where kind of our directors have enough kind of breathing room to spend the time kind of like managing the managers. Whereas like, I don't know, we've just been very blessed to be growing the rate that we are, where it's kind of just like, you know, you're shooting from the hip, making sure that like things are going. And it's exciting to see, like, especially truly, like, I mean, Stevie's been here for 2 weeks, our CRO, and just kind of seeing how we are starting to adopt some bigger company processes, right? And just being thoughtful about kind of the order of operations of things. I'll give one example, which is that like, you know, a good example are kind of weekly meeting cadences, which like, you know, we're starting to now, we kind of had a flow that kind of like in theory worked, and
it probably like grew by accretion over maybe it wasn't like the most intentional thing in the world, and like exactly, right?
And now it's just being more thoughtful about kind of like in the spirit of being kind of like more effective communicators, like downward throughout the entire sales org. Like, how should we think about structuring weekly team meetings and leadership meetings and topics that we cover, so that like we are putting ourselves in the best position to like, you know, be the best leaders and also kind of like the most kind of thorough communicators, if that makes sense.
I love it. Yeah. I'm a big operating rhythm guy. I think actually, I think David Sachs has a good blog post in his Substack. I think in my master classes around like, look, it's okay to have, it's one thing to have like, you know, a good metrics harness in place or a good coaching program in place or what have you, but it's like, it's got to be consistent.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things that one of the kind of mantras that we have at Atrium is like, calendar is destiny. Like you got to make room on the calendar or like it's not going to happen. Yeah. And I think that's a key thing is kind of thinking about like where you're being intentional about your operating rhythm and what have you. Kind of like last topic here. You had mentioned like a handful of time about competition. You're like, hey, you know, we're the pioneer, you know, we ran out ahead of everybody else, but now there's a bunch of ankle biters and what have you. And I think that that's, you know, with the lowered cost of like, you know, startup creation and what have you, it's not, you know, that I think most organizations are going to have that situation, right? What are some of the biggest like learnings that you've had around, you know, selling in a competitive environment, enabling reps in a competitive environment, et cetera?
Yeah. This one's obviously very near and dear to us. A couple of learnings. One is incredibly important to establish a competitive intel group internally, right? So we operated from a place where we didn't have one until kind of towards the end of last year, and it was so critical. What did you say?
It was you.
Kind of unofficially, all of us on the sales.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But like it was so important that like literally our CEO kind of like took that on, and I think still to this day leads it. Eventually, like, you know, once again, I come from companies where marketing has led that. But I don't think a company is ever too early to like go about kind of establishing dedicated resources to kind of gathering competitive intel if you are truly in a competitive space. We're in a tricky spot where like it's we make it very difficult for our competitors to see our software, and they make it difficult to see theirs. We're not a PLG motion, so I can't like go sign up for a free account to see it. So first advice, get that team up in place. We also use a tool called CRAN, which is like helpful to a certain extent, where they have these analysts, let's call them, that just kind of like watch our what changes that are happening.
Like my 4-year-old draws with.
Yeah, like public changes, which allow us to
Huh,
see kind of like, oh, they added this to their website, they removed this, etc.,
love it.
and just to stay on top of it. But yeah, I mean, last thing I'll say on this maybe is that, like, to date, maybe in the last year, we established this like kind of weekly all sales team competitive selling session every Wednesday for an hour. And
Yep.
those have been really helpful. I think like the biggest transition in kind of selling Vanta over the last couple of years has been, we've gone from a world where we had the luxury of kind of locker stuffing prospects, like asking them like a few questions, kind of like getting the answers we needed and saying, hey, like,
Come on, man, you need this.
You're going to
Let's
thank
go.
us later. Yeah. To like a world where it's really difficult for prospects to differentiate like offerings on like a 30-minute demo with my best rep versus like someone else's best rep. And so moving more into this, as every company does inevitably, like just more value selling, right? Not leaning on that as like the silver bullet, but just like leaning into that as like an opportunity to differentiate, right? So
yeah, I think I'm on Cran right now, and they here, let me go ahead and put this in here. Yeah, it looks like Clue is another company that does that as well. I think they're actually a software, excuse me, a Craft Ventures.
Yeah, they're both great companies. I know both of them.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the competitive selling thing, which is, I think, is like pretty cool. The competitive selling enablement session. One of the things that we added recently that's been extremely powerful for our sellers is we just have like a Monday afternoon, or like it's actually a Monday end of the day, like 4 to 5. I'm a big fan of like calendar space management. So like, as an example, like, no prospect's taking a call at 4 o'clock, right? Like, and if it's on the calendar, they're going to cancel, right? And so like we use those spots for like internal enablement things, or like, process things or whatever. So like, so like 4 o'clock on a Monday, we have our enablement hour. This is actually something that our SDR team started doing. So shout out to Deb Fernandez, who came up with this idea. They started out doing this where they could like workshop things and what have you. So we just like have this open space. It's like there's a hot topic or whatever, we'll like throw it in there. They're all the sessions are recorded. Shocking, right? We invite chorus, all the things, and then like I've just got my document of like all the different sessions, and like these are the 4 things that we talked about, or like the other day I think we were talking about like we have like a new month capability in our in our motion, and so we were just kind of talking through some of the nuances and the talk tracks and what have you associated with that, and kind of like the rules of engagement, etc. But that was like a 20-minute conversation, and then somebody actually, and we're like, okay, are there anything else? And somebody asked a question about like formula fields in Salesforce and like how to do that. And so like I just gave a 15-minute session on adding fields to various objects in Salesforce, how formula fields work, and then how all that like works from a custom filter integration on Atrium. And so like, importantly, like recording it all such that someone can come back after the fact, and if they want to like, kind of like Neo in the Matrix, just be like I know Kung Fu now, they could go back and like watch all those at like 1.5x over a series of hours, and like and get kind of like caught up there. That's been
real quick. That's super cool. Do you have someone that owns that content and make sure that like anything that is like egregiously outdated is no longer available to be consumed?
Oh no, of course not. Yeah, no. It's just in there. It's just in there. Wonderful. Well, Eric, this was super rad. Thank you. I told you the time would fly. It super flew. Super rad. Thank you for taking the time. Next week, we've got Puyan Salehi, the co-founder and CEO of Scratchpad, also the founder of Persist IQ. Yeah, it'll be really fun.
Puyan's the man. We use Scratchpad as well. Great product.
We do as well. Yeah. We use Scratchpad. And anyway, so like it'll be a really interesting conversation, because like, I mean, obviously we'll talk about sales leadership, but also like selling to sales organizations, and also designing software for sales organizations as well. So it should be pretty fun. Yeah. Eric, have a great weekend. Okay.
Thanks, babe. Talk to you soon, Pete.
Okay, later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.